Welcome to this session of Breaking Through These Brick Walls, where I will outline the 13 steps to finding your pre-1865 enslaved ancestors using DNA and records. I always honor my grandmother. It is for the love of her why I dedicate my time, energy, and love of genealogy to the quest of finding my ancestors and family members who have been lost due to slavery. This is a photo of my grandmother's third great-grandmother, or a distant aunt, that I discovered while researching my ancestral lines. It is these types of finds that keep me motivated and encouraged to continue this genealogical journey. Now, first and foremost, DNA doesn't lie. It confirms, verifies, clarifies, and often mystifies your connection to others. While it can sometimes cause confusion as you work to understand how you're related, the bottom line, if the DNA says you're connected, then you are, and that makes you family. Before DNA, we relied solely on records to support the oral histories passed down through generations. Today, with the combination of DNA and documented evidence, we're able to both confirm and challenge those stories. But what happens when the DNA doesn't match the oral story you've been told? When I first started documenting the oral history from my grandmother, these were some of the accounts she told me. First, her father's name was Henry James Anderson. Second, he was 30 years older than her mother. Third, he bought 7 marriage licenses, but only married 6 times. Fourth, he had 23 kids. After research, there were at least 26 kids. Fifth, he wasn't from Bullock County, Alabama. He was from Barber County, Alabama, and she even mentioned Marengo, Alabama. Sixth, her mother's name was Emma, Marlila, Lucina, Lucanna, Luvanna, Elizabeth Sasherly Francis Cope. Seventh, we are related to the Andersons, McGrady's, Copes, Masons, Birds, and Fitzpatricks. I'm sure trying to find the proof in all of these accounts is the reason I've been on this genealogical journey for 36 years now. This pedigree chart represents my family tree spanning 13 generations, with a color-coded grid illustrating the varying levels of complexity I encountered while researching my ancestors. This is a fan chart, a different way of displaying my pedigree chart that helps organize and group ancestors from a different visual perspective. Always keep in mind that with each layer of complexity in your research, there are important steps that should not be skipped. While DNA can be a powerful tool to kickstart your journey, it should never be the sole reason for adding someone to your family tree. Each edition offers an opportunity to learn, and through that learning, you gain a deeper understanding of your family's history. At the intermediate level, your research begins to focus on the period in American history when many families were separated due to slavery. In your quest to find your enslaved ancestors, always keep in mind that this era is particularly challenging to explore, requiring a significant investment of time, patience, and careful attention to detail. Let's talk about DNA. Some fundamental facts about DNA. Each person inherits DNA from both parents, receiving 23 chromosomes from their mother and 23 from their father. However, since we inherit 23 pairs of chromosomes from our parents, these chromosomes also carry genetic material from our ancestors. The way this DNA is passed down is random, meaning we don't receive the exact same DNA from our parents and ancestors as our siblings or other relatives. In other words, DNA is distributed randomly. To understand just how random the distribution of DNA can be, we often have to use other tools like DNA Painter. DNA Painter is a free, user-friendly online tool designed to help genealogists and family history enthusiasts interpret and visualize their DNA test results. If we use the shared CM project feature, we can enter the number of identified centimorgans, or CMs, into the tool to show us the varying possible relationships a person could be to you. If we enter 8 centimorgans into the tool, a person who is 8 CMs to you could be from a half-second cousin, one time removed to an 8th cousin. Because of these varying degrees of relationships, it is important to research each person's information. While looking at a pedigree chart, column 5 is generation 5. This is where your second great-grandparents and your third cousins are identified here. And column 6 is generation 6, and your third great grandparents and your fourth cousins are identified here. Each additional column represents the next sequence of relationships, and your cousins are defined based on the ancestor and the relative that connects them to you. Triangulating your DNA connections. And because DNA is passed down randomly, it's important to test your relatives, especially older family members, and to connect with cousins and others researching the same family lines. This helps build a more complete and accurate genetic picture. Scientists have studied the number of cousins you might have based on your DNA connections. Generally, the more distant the relationship, the less DNA you share from your common ancestors. This means you might not appear as a match to someone you're actually related to because you didn't inherit DNA from that particular ancestor. But not showing as a match doesn't mean you're not related. That's why it's crucial to connect with other cousins who share DNA matches with you and compare your matches to theirs. It's also said that when the amount of shared DNA, measured in centimorgans, is very small, it might be impossible to determine the exact connection. I believe it's not impossible. It just requires effort and research. Even if it feels like searching for a needle in a haystack, that needle can become priceless. For me, that moment came when I discovered a photo of my grandmother's ancestor. In order to uncover your ancestral connection to slavery, you must look at the big ancestral picture. Triangulating your DNA connections. This is a chart that shows varying types of complex genetic relationships. Let's explore how a consanguineous relationship may have developed as a result of circumstances during the slavery era. On the left, we have the enslaver and his wife and their family of sons and daughters. In this example, the enslaver decides to have sex with a slave or indentured servant. The parents of this union are both the enslaver, represented as A, and the slave or indentured servant, represented as B. Therefore, the children of the enslaver A are half-siblings to the children of the slave or indentured servant B. To make the situation a little complicated, in 1790, the enslaver decides to sell some of the slaves to Georgia, while at the same time, some of his sons and daughters by his wife relocate to Texas. As some of the children moved to Alabama and Texas, their father provided them with enslaved individuals through a legal deed of gift to accompany them on their journey, which meant some of his children by the slave or indentured servant were removed from the family in Maryland and taken to Texas and Alabama. In an effort to increase the enslaved population, some of the enslavers' sons engaged in sexual relations with enslaved women, dismissive of the fact that some of these women were their half-sisters. This is an example of a consanguineous relationship resulting from the systemic and coerced nature of slavery. Now let's look at an example of an endogamous situation within this same family. The branch of the family that remained in Maryland lived in the same region for generations. Over time, their children and descendants were separated and sent to different enslavers across the state. As a result, many lost connection with their relatives. Unaware of their shared lineage, some later formed relationships and started families with others who were, unknowingly, their own kin. The forced separation of enslaved individuals over time, whether to distant regions or within the same state, did not erase their familial bonds. The complex relationships created under slavery make it essential to not only understand how these individuals are connected, but also why it's important to consider low centimorgan CM matches when triangulating relationships. Doing so helps to reconstruct the broader genetic picture of the family and reveal how individuals are related. Keep in mind, the further back in time your research goes, the more complex it becomes, and the more important those lower centimorgan matches may be in uncovering hidden connections. Because at the end of the day, they are still family. By following this 13-step process carefully, you'll increase your chances of successfully identifying your enslaved ancestors. And if spreadsheets aren't your thing, don't worry. This approach may be perfectly suited to your style of research. Step 1. Identify your 1870 census ancestors. The first step in determining where to begin looking for your ancestors is to research your family back to the 1870 census. In the United States, the first population census was conducted in 1790, but it only included individuals from the original 13 colonies, meaning not all counties were recorded. African Americans were not officially documented with both first and last names in federal records until after emancipation. The 1870 U.S. Census was the first to list formerly enslaved individuals by full name. To begin tracing the records of your enslaved ancestors, it is essential to first locate them in the 1870 census, or, if unavailable, in the 1880 census. This chart highlights the details recorded in each U.S. Census depending on the year you are examining. This chart lists the date the first census was taken sorted by date. And this chart lists the date the first census was taken sorted alphabetically. Step 2. Note your ancestors' surnames. Once you've done your research to identify your ancestors back to the 1870 census, add them to your tree so they will be listed in the pedigree chart view. Once you view the pedigree chart, you will see a pattern of surnames which lists your sets of grandparents. These surnames are vital for you to know because they will help you to determine the name of the enslaver you should be looking for. This is how my pedigree chart looked after I'd begun to research and documenting my ancestors. As I looked at my pedigree chart, I could see the oldest ancestors who were recorded, and this helped me to determine which of them were born before the 1870 census. Doing this, I could see a pattern of surnames unfolding. So the next step was to document the sets of surnames. Starting with my maternal line, as I documented the names of my ancestors, this became the set of names I knew I would need to start researching. But which ancestor should I research first? I started with the name that seemed to be the easiest, based on the fact that I could start by looking for documentation to prove my grandmother's oral account she shared with me. Those conversations would point me into the direction of the key facts that I needed to be mindful of. Third step, things to know. Before or while you are looking for your enslaved ancestors, there are some key things you should know that will help you along your journey. Each state has a genealogical society dedicated to preserving the history of that state. Many of the published information can be viewed online, or as a member of the organization. You get access to many of the documents and articles that can be purchased or reviewed online that are only available to members. Many organizations host monthly sessions to connect with their members. It is essential to know what the geological landscape of an area look like based on the date you are researching. Georgia today does not look like Georgia in 1850. Or Georgia in 1830. Or Georgia in 1800 when the Cherokee and Muskogee Creek Indians lived on the land at that time. Be mindful of where to look for records based on the period and time of your research. Now, before you start searching for enslaved ancestors, there are some topics you need to know that will help you in your search, like names for slaves are Negro, servant or indentured servant, boy or girl, hand, like a field hand, mulatto, 1/2 black, 1/2 white, quadroon, 1/4 black, and octoroon, 1/8 black. A FPOC was a free person of color, and sometimes mixed race, who was not enslaved. These individuals were often born free, typically descended from other free people of color, or unions between European and African or indigenous individuals, or of mixed race, including African, Native American, and European ancestry, especially in early colonial and southern states. A manumission was the formal act of freeing an enslaved person by their enslaver. In historical contexts, especially in the Americas during the era of slavery, manumission could happen for various reasons, like as a reward for loyal service, through purchased freedom by the enslaved person or their family, via a will, granting freedom upon the enslaver's death, or for moral or religious reasons. The laws and social acceptance of manumissions varied widely, depending on the time and region. In many places, manumitted individuals still faced legal and social restrictions, but they were no longer considered property. Several U.S. states, especially in the South, prohibited free persons of color or newly manumitted individuals from residing in the state or county, particularly during the 19th century. These laws were meant to preserve the racial and social order of slavery by limiting the presence of free Black people who could inspire or aid enslaved populations. These laws reflect the widespread anxiety among white populations about the presence of free Black individuals and how that challenged the legitimacy of slavery. In genealogical research, this context can help explain migrations, forced removals, or disappearances from records. If you're researching a connection to Native Americans, it's important to know where they lived and the resources that are available for those areas. Step 4. Select an ancestor for research. When I first started documenting information about my family, as I listened to the names she shared with me, I started recognizing the sets of ancestors that I knew would drive my research. But the question was, which names would I start with? I decided to start with the names that seemed to be the easiest since I could use the oral accounts she had given me. Because those conversations would point me in the direction of key facts that I needed to be mindful of, I started with the Anderson surname. Researching to prove or disprove oral accounts. When I began researching the Anderson line, I started with my grandmother's profile. I knew her father, Henry James Anderson, was approximately 30 years older than her mother, Elizabeth Cope. So I started by looking for the Anderson surname on the 1870 census for Bullock, Alabama. When that returned at least a couple of pages of Anderson's, I then filtered the list of Andersons in Bullock, Alabama to include his first name, Henry. Now I got a fewer list of records, so this was a manageable list, but I had to go back to the notes I took of my grandmother's oral accounts she shared with me about her family so that I would choose the right person to review. First, her father's name was Henry James Anderson. Second, he was 30 years older than her mother. Third, he bought 7 marriage licenses but only married 6 times. Fourth, he had 23 kids. After research, there were at least 26 kids. Fifth, he wasn't from Bullock County, Alabama. He was from Barber County, Alabama, and she even mentioned Marengo, Alabama. Sixth, her mother's name was Emma Marlila Lucina Lusanna Luvona Elizabeth Sasherly Francis Cope. Seventh, we are related to the Andersons, McGrady's, Copes, Masons, Birds, and Fitzpatricks. I'm sure trying to find the proof in all of these accounts is the reason I've been on this genealogical journey for 36 years now. So recalling the oral accounts she shared with me, I saw some Henry Andersons, but I didn't believe the names listed were her parents, so I decided to try to find proof in some of the other accounts of her life she shared with me. When I did some research of later census records, I found the 1930 census record where Henry was recorded living in the same house as his wife Elizabeth with my grandmother and her siblings, so these accounts were validated. I also saw where he was recorded as 62 years of age and she was 38, so the account that he was almost 30 years older than her was verified. I also found a 1900 census record for Elizabeth, where her name was recorded as Sasher Lee, born in 1897. So that account of my grandmother's name was verified. Going back to that list of names on the 1870 census, I saw a couple of Henrys listed as a child, so I had to go back to recall what his mother's name was. My grandmother told me his mother's name was Creasy, and they called her Mama Creasy. There was never anyone on the 1870 census in Bullock County, Alabama with the name of Creasy or even Lucretia. So for years, I was stuck not accepting the names on the Bullock County 1870 census. I looked over my notes and remembered my grandmother said her father had a sister named Millie who had married a George Miles. So I had a Henry Anderson, Creasy Anderson, and a Millie Miles. Henry had the following children: Callie, Felix, Phyllis, McKinley, Annis, Louisa, Sarah, Dallas, along with my grandmother's siblings, Jesse, Arabelle, Henrietta, and Ernest. There were also some outside kids I documented and knew one day I'd get back to proving that information. Because I began to gather so much information about my grandmother's siblings, it took me some years to get back to tracking the Andersons, until one day I did a search for just Andersons in Barber County, Alabama. No other names or information, and this is what I found. A child, Henry Anderson, was recorded on the 1870 census in Barber County, Alabama, in the home of his father, James Anderson, and his mother, Cretia Anderson. The family was living in Barber County, Alabama. I noticed that the family was recorded as white, but I just assumed they were so light that they could pass for white because of their Native American ancestry that was passed down orally by the family. So I accepted it knowing I would try to prove that connection. I also saw that his siblings were listed in the home. So by changing how I looked for the records, I was able to verify many of the oral accounts my grandmother had told me. There was still so much more to unpack, but after I worked the process of validating the oral accounts I could using census records, this is how I was able to identify my ancestors one at a time using the census records, including finding all 7 marriage licenses. I was also able to find records for children who either died at birth or at a young age. These children were always counted in the number of children a person had. So with all of that in mind, I was able to find 26 children, which included the outside children. And so after having done all of that, it was time to look for their enslaved ancestors and family members who had been separated due to slavery. Researching to approve or disprove new information. One day, in 2019, I got a message on Facebook from a musician in New Zealand who said she is researching the Wiggums for an album she's doing, and she found my information about the Andersons online. I never heard the name Wiggum, so I asked her to tell me more. She shared that she was researching familial ties out of Bullock County, Alabama, and that Creasy Wiggum was related to the Andersons. While she was speaking, I remembered back when I discovered the 1870 census for the family. They were recorded as a white family, and I thought that was because they were so light-skinned and possibly of Indian origin. I decided to search for Wiggums living in Barber County, Alabama. Well, lo and behold, I found the entire family recorded as living in Township 9, Range 26 near Clayton, in House 381. But this time, they are recorded as black. And everyone in the house had the surname Wiggum. How could this happen? The family is not only recorded twice, but were recorded living in a different household, in a different location, and as African Americans. One thing's for sure, we weren't back there during that time period to understand why this happened. All I know is that I now have a new dilemma. I needed to understand the backstory to the Wiggums. I asked my cousin, did she have additional information about the family, and she sent me this information. She mentioned that the family is recorded in the Alabama Department of Archives publication, and they identified their enslaver. As I scrolled through the book, which was published in September 2011 and available for free online, I saw this article that talked about how the people of Bullock County and Montgomery County joined a movement to fight for reparations of former slaves. As I continued to scroll the page, I saw the names. Creasy Anderson, age 94, and Abe Wiggum, age 59. They both noted that they were slaves of Joe Wiggum. And on the last page of the article, I saw the name Millie Miles, age 48, was also a slave of Joe Wiggum. So now I had to research information about this National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association. And I came across this book about the founder, Callie House. I needed to spend some time to see if my family were recorded in the documentation about this association. You see, this is how your research goes from one thing to something else. And when you look up, you're now 1 year researching something totally different than when you started. Well, after I found out everything I could at that time about this organization, I needed to get back to researching information about the Wiggums. So I did a search for DNA matches to the name Wiggum, and I got more results than I expected. I looked at this person's profile because she had the name Wiggum in her tree, and I could see that we were in fact distant cousins. As mentioned earlier, understanding how someone is related to you is essential, which is why having the right tools is so important. These resources help you explore the different possibilities of how closely someone might be connected to you. After seeing her profile, I decided to do a search in MyHeritage, and I found another cousin with the surname Wiggum in his tree. Once I could confirm I had matches to the surname Wiggum, I had pages. After pages, I had 3 pages of matches who had the surname Wiggum in their tree. So now I needed to look at the trees of my shared matches to Sherry to see if they have someone in their pedigree chart with the surname of Wiggum also. After looking at my list of matches to see who had the surname Wiggum, a few names in my match trees started to stand out. After checking my list of DNA matches, I then checked my brother's list of matches to see what names he had that I didn't have, and I recorded those names. A pattern started to appear. I noticed the Wiggum matches were in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. Something took place with the family where they went from Georgia to Alabama and then to Mississippi. I remembered during the process of researching the census records that I wouldn't accept information about Henry Anderson living in Bullock County, Alabama during 1870 because my grandmother told me her father's family was not from Bullock County, but Barber County. This was another fact through DNA that helped to prove her oral account of the family. Even though she'd never met any of her ancestors who were slaves, the oral accounts about the family were proving to be true. I've now demonstrated how tracking the pattern of surnames in your DNA match trees can prepare you for the next phase of research. When you begin examining records related to potential enslavers, this information equips you to recognize your ancestor if they appear in those documents. With this insight, I was ready to continue my search for my enslaved ancestors. This time, by researching the family of the enslaver, focusing specifically on the Wiggum surname. Step 5, build a tree for the enslaver. Researching the enslaver. The first step in building a tree for the enslaver is to begin the research about their family. During the era of slavery, individuals often held a variety of roles. It's important to remember that just because someone is listed as having enslaved people on the census, it does not necessarily mean that they were the legal owner. Enslaved individuals were hired out from their original owner or placed on a plantation managed by someone else. In such cases, the person listed on the census may have simply been managing or leasing the enslaved individuals, not owning them outright. This could explain why certain individuals do not appear in probate records when that enslaver passed away. That's why researching records beyond the census is essential. It provides a clearer picture of actual ownership and management. Additionally, understanding these dynamics can help explain why a formerly enslaved person may have chosen a particular surname after emancipation. Now that I know my family was living in Barber County and were recorded as having the last name Wiggum, I searched the 1870 census for Barber County looking for white individuals with the last name Wiggum. By choosing exact, you will only get a list of individuals with the exact information you've entered. While reviewing the list, I specifically looked for a Joseph Wiggum, as my family had identified him as their enslaver, and indeed his name appeared among the entries. Noticing that he was born in Georgia signaled to me that I should search for other relatives from Georgia who might be part of his family line. When I reviewed the details of the record, I noticed that, just like my family, this Joseph Wiggum was living in Barber County, Alabama, specifically in Township 8, Range 25, with Clio listed as his post office. So I decided to search the 1870 census to see if there were any Wiggums in Georgia. And there were, but I also noticed there Wiggums in Washington and Choctaw, Alabama. That confirmed I was heading in the right direction with this family, so I was ready to start building a tree for them. Building a tree of the enslaver's family. The first step was to create a tree for Joseph Wiggum. Because I have the information from the census as a starting point, I need to identify his relatives so that I can understand the relationship between the Wiggums of Alabama and the Wiggums of Georgia. I haven't confirmed a relationship to my family, so I started by building a new tree, starting with his name and information. I added to his profile that he was born in Georgia and possibly died in Barber County, Alabama, just to see if there was someone who had a tree with this information that I could review. Then I clicked on the search ancestry option to see if I could get a public tree for him. Once the page displayed, I chose the filter option on the left to filter by family trees. From the list, I chose a tree to review and noticed, while it had a lot of great sources, there weren't many children listed. Many times when you're researching trees of the enslaver, you'll find not all of the children have been identified. This happens because the person who created the tree may only be interested in this particular line. A good public tree has very good sources identified. View the sources to understanding why those records were chosen. Build your tree using public trees that have great details in them. Keep looking at public trees until you find some good sources and continue to build your tree. Look for trees that include information about their parents, and if the person died before 1870, did the tree include a source for the will and probate records? That will save you some time looking for the record yourself. However, if the probate record is not identified in the tree, then from the profile page, you can do a search on Ancestry and choose to see court land wills and financial records. If there are any records for this person, you will see them listed once you filter the list by that option. Saving information from someone's tree to your tree. Once you've identified a profile you'd like to save to your tree, choose the Tools option on the top of the page, then click the Save to Tree option. Next, choose the tree you want the information saved to, and type the name of the person in your tree. It's best to have the person in your tree so that you can save the information directly to that profile. Or you can add them as a new person in your tree. Once this is done, they will be considered a floater in your tree. I chose to save the information to the profile that was created in the tree. Be sure to review the information you're saving, especially children. Many times the children are already in your tree, so when you check the box to add them, you're just adding duplicates, so make sure you review each match before you save it to the tree. Once this process is completed, I now have them listed in my tree, and hints for the profile are available for me to view. As I started building Joseph Wiggum's family tree, several important details emerged. By adding his children, siblings, parents, and grandparents, I was able to visualize the structure of his family. I continue building the tree as far back as possible, ideally to their country of origin, so I can better understand the family's history. During this process, I discovered that the 1870 census listed three individuals named Joseph Whigham: Joseph Whigham Sr., his son Joseph Whigham Jr., and Joseph Jr.'s son, Joseph Thomas Whigham. Without constructing the family tree, I wouldn't have uncovered this generational pattern. As I build the family tree, I make a point to include the wives, paying close attention to their maiden names. This step is especially important because during slavery, it was common for wives and their children to be gifted enslaved individuals from family members when they married and in the person's will. In order to clearly understand the origin of enslaved individuals means you must thoroughly research the wife's side of the family. In this case, I discovered that Joseph Jr. married Jane Elizabeth Walden, and his mother was Elizabeth Hannah. I also discovered that Joseph Sr.'s mother's maiden name was Gibson. With the Whigham family tree now fully developed, I'm ready to move on to the next step in the process. How to prevent adding duplicates to your tree. How people make the mistake of adding duplicates to the tree is by not checking to see if the person is already in your tree. As you add parents and children to the tree, Ancestry then provides you the option to add their siblings or other individuals to your tree. The problem arises when those individuals are already in the tree. How you can tell if they're already in the tree is by clicking on the link that says "Not a new person." When you click that link, a pop-up displays, giving you the ability to see the names of individuals who are already in the tree. If you confirm this person isn't listed, click on the "Not a new person" option, or you can ignore adding new individuals, especially if you see this link. If the person is not in your tree, you would just continue the previous process of clicking on the checkbox to add them. Step 6. Look for probate and will records. After adding all the children and spouses to the enslaver's family tree, I begin identifying individuals who died before 1870. These are the people I'll focus on when searching for probate and other records that may document the enslaved individuals they owned. There are many different sources of probate records. I started with wills. Select the person who died closest to 1870. This person would have the names of enslaved individuals who were most likely recorded on the 1870 census, so these names will be familiar to you. Look for a will and probate record in the list of sources for them on the person's profile page. Or if the probate record is not identified under sources, you can select the Search on Ancestry option to search for the record. If you choose to search for the record, a page displays showing you the list of information that you can review. On the left side of the page, look under the Filters option for the Court Land Wills and Financials link. When I clicked on that link, a list of probate sources display. If a person has a will, that source will be listed. When I clicked on the source for Thomas Whigham, this particular record shows Thomas Whigham is the son-in-law to Robert Patterson, and Robert Patterson is giving him the slave Esther. Because this is a valid probate record for Thomas Whigham, this record would be saved to his profile. Once I chose the option to save, a dialog displays. I selected to save this information to Thomas Galloway Whigham. A new window displays to confirm saving this information to the person you have selected. Once I hit to save to tree, the record is now a source in the tree. I did this for everyone in the tree who died prior to 1870. The rewards for this work will be revealed very soon. Step 7. Look for deeds and notes. During the enslavement period in the United States, prior to 1865, a deed or a note could refer to specific legal and financial documents that involved enslaved people, since they were treated as property under the law. A deed was a formal legal document that recorded the transfer or ownership of property, and this included enslaved people. Types of deeds were bills of sale, gift deed, deed of trust, and land deeds with slaves included. A note, typically a promissory note, was a written agreement in which one party promised to pay another a specific amount of money. If a person didn't pay the note, then the slaves were returned to the owner or were sold to satisfy the debt. You can find records of deeds and defaulted notes in several key sources, including probate records, chancery court cases, deeds of trust, county court minutes, and newspaper advertisements. Sources to find these records online are the county websites or the genealogical societies, but the best source for these records online are familysearch.org. You can find most of the probate records have been digitized and many times transcribed and indexed so you can search for them. On Family Search, I like to manually look at images for records because many times these records are only digitized and not transcribed. Therefore, you might not find the information you're looking for, so it is best to take the time to review these records yourself. I filter the information by location and the type of records I'd like to review, and then I select the group of images with the goal of identifying references to slaves. The Family Search full text search feature allows users to search through the entire content of digitized documents, not just indexed names or basic metadata. This means that you can enter keywords like names, places, occupations, or terms such as deed or note, and Family Search will look for those words within the actual text of historical documents that have been digitized and processed with optical character recognition, OCR. Step 8, look for taxation records. You can find tax records in county courthouses and archives, state archives, and online like Family Search and Ancestry. Important details to note. Only a few states included the names of the slaves in tax records. Names usually appear in early records, probate-linked tax rolls, or when enslaved individuals were collateral for debt. Names, when listed, are typically first names only, and often only for taxable males. But some records include the age of the slave. Consistency varies by county, by year, and by tax type, land versus personal property. My research for the Wiggums was in Alabama and Georgia, so these states did not record slave names in tax records, and they didn't have tax records until 1820 or 1830. Now that I'd located all of the records I could find for the family, it was time to go to the next step. Step 9. Document slaves noted in records. Using icons and labels. As you dive into researching enslavement and other complex family history scenarios, it's helpful to think ahead about how you want to label and organize the people you identify, whether they're enslavers, enslaved individuals, or others identified in your tree. Having a consistent way to identify individuals in your tree can make your research more manageable and reduce confusion over time. Genealogy labels and icons act like visual shortcuts, helping you quickly recognize and organize important details. One great resource is Nika Sewell Smith, who offers a wide range of icons specifically designed for this purpose. You can find and download them on her website or by searching for Black Pro Gen online. During today's session, I'll show you how I personally use these icons to keep track of the individuals in my tree and stay organized as I uncover more layers of their stories. Another free source for labels can be found on the Black Pearls of Genealogy website. Or I use canva.com to create my own labels. Add icons to profiles in your tree that are appropriate for your research, keeping in mind that others are researching as well. And if you have a lot of theories in your tree, others could misconstrue your information as factual. Each person has the right to document and manage their research as they see fit. However, as we share information, we should be considerate of others. Also, be mindful that others might not be aware of their connection to you. It may be best practice for your tree to be private until you have vetted all of your research, but at the end of the day, DNA don't lie. It verifies, clarifies, and most times mystifies. Adding the slave census information to the enslaver's profile. Before the 1870 census, individuals who owned slaves were recorded in separate slave schedules taken every 10 years alongside the federal census. It's important to attach both the free population records and the slave schedules to the profiles of known enslavers in your tree. Doing this can help you identify who owned or managed enslaved people and guide you toward the names and households that should be the focus of your research. From 1790 to 1840, only the head of the family was recorded along with the number of individuals in the home and the age range of the slaves. But for 1850 and 1860, both a census of free individuals is listed, along with a separate census for those years for individuals who owned slaves. Between 1790 and 1810, not every state conducted a census. It's important to keep in mind how the land and territories were structured during those years, as some areas hadn't yet become states, and census records may not exist for them during that time. Adding census information to notes. Now that I've added family members, sources, and I've added icons to everyone in the tree, it's time to start extracting and tracking the information I would need to find my enslaved ancestors. The first thing I should do is to click on the Tools icon. Then ensure the Show Research Tools option is selected. This is how you get the research tools to always display on the profile page. Next, click on the Notes and Comments option. To display the Notes panel, this is where I like to enter information that I would like to see at a glance. The note entered here are only visible for you to see or someone you've given permission to be an editor in your tree. Another source you can add to a person's profile is by clicking on the option to view the gallery. From the gallery, select the Create button, then select the Document option. When you create a document in your tree, you can include any information you find useful. You're free to copy and paste content from a Word document, spreadsheet, or any other source. Just keep in mind that once added, documents become publicly viewable. So if your tree is public or searchable, anyone can see what you've entered. The first thing I like to make a note of is the census information and how many slaves they owned. When you click on the source, a dialog displays that lists the number of people in the home and how many slaves they owned. Select the information in the dialog and copy it to the clipboard. After it's copied, close the dialog. I then paste the information to the Notes panel. I make a note above the information indicating the census year and the number of enslaved individuals the person owned. I do this for each census year. This step provides valuable insight into the person's life and helps to focus your research on individuals who owned slaves. Next, I add information from the will into the Notes section. John Byron Wigham, or Person A, died in 1823 in Georgia, and so did John Wigham, Person B. I found a will for a John Wigham, but without having done the work to research everyone in this family, I wouldn't have known that there were a few John Wighams who died in 1823, and I would have mistakenly assigned this record to the wrong person. Read the will to find clues that can clarify which person this record is for. Many times, the clues are identified by the spouses of the descendants, and also who is identified as an administrator or executor for the will. I saw the names of Robert Donaldson and William Donaldson, and when I looked at John Byron's children, his daughter Mary Wigham married Robert Donaldson, so I knew this probate record was for John Byron Wigham, Person A. When I viewed John Byron's profile, I saw some probate records had been saved to his profile. When I click on the first option, like the census record, a dialog displays. Many times, Ancestry provides details extracted from the record. I copy this information to the clipboard, but I make sure that I review the actual record to be sure this information was transcribed correctly. So, just like the process with the census record, I select the information in the dialog starting with the person of record, and I include all information that documents household members and identifies the slaves and the distribution of the slaves. I add a line to separate the different groups of information in the Notes field, and I paste the information from the clipboard to the Notes panel. After adding my notes, I can now view the earlier census records leading up to the year of his death. The 1820 census lists 7 enslaved individuals. Tracking details about the slaves helps to tell the backstory about those enslaved. When searching for wills, don't limit yourself to just the individual's records. Be sure to also explore the wills and probate files of their spouse's family. Enslaved individuals were often given to women as part of a marriage settlement or dowry. So, examining the spouse's family records can reveal important connections. For example, when researching Agnes McNeely, who married John Byron Wigham, it's just as important to review the McNeely family's probate records as it is the Wighams. When I look to view probate records for Agnes' family, at a glance we see Agnes' father, Andrew McNeely, did in fact sell or give a slave named Clow to John Wigham. But after further reviewing the actual document, John and Agnes were given 9 unnamed Negroes and not a slave named Clow. This is why it is important to review the actual record yourself. After identifying the enslaved individuals through this process, I was able to trace many of their descendants by linking them to the 1870 census. This journey is ongoing, but by triangulating my DNA matches with those of others, especially across different platforms, I've made meaningful connections. Some of these individuals may not match me directly in ancestry, but they're related to me or others I'm connected to, and they've documented their family lines to the best of their ability. By combining these connections with thorough research in historical records and DNA evidence, I've been able to piece together our shared story and uncover the roots of our ancestors. Through this process, I'm proving that we are in fact family. Step 10. Manage and track information. Using tags to manage information. Tags are a great way of tracking people and information you've documented in your tree. Click the tag icon. The My Tree Tags panel will display. There are many different types of tags you can use to help you filter your information. Ancestry has different groups of tags identified that you can use, and they give you the ability to create your own tags. 80 is the maximum number of custom tags you can create. For information on how and why you should use tags, watch my Breaking Through These Brick Walls session on using DNA to find missing or unknown ancestors. Using networks to manage information. In 2025, Ancestry provides Pro Tools subscribers a dynamic way to document and visualize relationships in your tree. The tool enables genealogists to create customized networks that include not only direct relatives, but also friends, neighbors, associates, and others who played significant roles in their ancestors' lives. Once you've created networks from each person's profile, you would just choose the Add to Network feature. Everyone who has been added to a network will display. You can filter and create reports once you've added individuals in your tree to a network. For more information on how to use networks, watch my Breaking Through These Brick Walls session on using DNA to find missing or unknown ancestors. Step 11. Finding DNA matches. Tracking DNA matches from Ancestry and GEDmatch. For information on how to use your DNA matches to find connections, watch my Breaking Through These Brick Walls session on using DNA to find missing or unknown ancestors. Step 12. Contacting matches. When you've identified matches, be mindful that some people may have only taken a test to know their origin, and others might not be prepared to discuss how you are related to them because of the complex relationship dynamic that occurred because their ancestor had sex with the slaves. Proceed with caution as you contact people about discussing your genetic connection. Adding DNA match information to notes. One day in 2024, I received a message from a DNA cousin who shared that it appeared I was not just a DNA match to her, but I was also related to both her mother and her brother. Their surname was not familiar to me, so we shared information with one another, like our family tree and our DNA information. I also noticed she added their GEDmatch kits to her profile, which was amazing, because I could look up their information in GEDmatch to try and determine our matches and to view other shared matches in that tool. It took a year for me to finally understand her connection to me, but because I used the steps identified in this process for all of my ancestral lines, eventually names appeared that she recognized even if I hadn't. So in 2025, she contacted me to share how we were related through a connection to the Wigham line. After we talked, I was able to add her and the other identified family members to my tree. I added the family for whom I was a DNA match to the networks I had created. I copied the information about how we are related from our connection page, and I pasted the information to the notes section for her profile, which includes the link to her personal tree. Now I will be able to view the connection in my tree, along with detailed information like how we are related, and then be able to easily view her personal tree. The last step in this process is to copy this information all the way back through each ancestor in her tree until I find the common ancestor that connects us both. Because I have added all of the notes about my other cousin to the notes section, I can see how we are all descendants of siblings with the common ancestor of John Biggie Gibson. This is a process that is repeated for every match I find. I was able to tell Angela that we not only have a connection to the Wiggum surname through Joseph's Wiggum's wife, whose maiden name was Gibson. After further discussion and after reviewing her GED-match information, I discovered the connection through her paternal line, which connects to the Andersons, Proctors, and Queens out of Maryland. Step 13, repeat the steps. While the intermediate level involves a detailed process with extensive research and documentation, completing it thoroughly can help you break through many brick walls. By combining DNA evidence with historical records, you'll not only confirm your connections, but also uncover the documentation needed to prove relationships with extended family members who were separated by slavery. And your tree will begin to look like my tree, which includes documentation and research for all of my family members. All because you adhered to the 13-step process for finding your pre-1870 enslaved ancestors using DNA and documentation.